Welcome back to the Class Concurrent Gaming Podcast, a weekly podcast where we look at the history and development of video games. I'm your host, E22, and this is the final episode of Season 2 of the podcast, where we've been reviewing the games being used in Season 7 of the Retro Gaming League. The Retro Gaming League is a fun, friendly competition on Facebook where pages come together each and every week to challenge each other head-to-head in a different retro video game. This week is the championship round for the Retro League, and we're going way back to the Sega Master System for this one. Yes, that's right, they made a Sonic the Hedgehog game, and we're going to tell you all about it. Sonic the Hedgehog is a 1991 side-scrolling platform game. It is a companion to the 16-bit Sega Genesis game Sonic the Hedgehog for the 8-bit Master System and Game Gear consoles. Ancient, a studio founded by composer Yuzo Koshiro for the project, developed the game, and Sega published it to promote the handheld Game Gear. The 8-bit Sonic is a side-scrolling video game similar in style to the 16-bit game, but reduced in complexity to fit the 8-bit systems. The premise and story of the 8-bit Sonic are identical to that of the 16-bit game. As the anthropomorphic hedgehog Sonic, the player races through levels to rescue the imprisoned animals Dr. Robotnik plots to turn into robots. Gameplay is similar. Sonic collects rings while avoiding obstacles, but is paced extremely slower as the 8-bit version focuses more on exploration. While some level themes, such as Green Hill Zone, are borrowed from the 16-bit game, others are original. It also features a different soundtrack from Koshiro, which comprises new material alongside some arrangements of Masato Nakamura's tracks for the 16-bit game. Reviewers acclaimed the 8-bit Sonic for its level variety, visuals, gameplay, and audio. Many believe that it compared favorably to its 16-bit counterpart, although some criticism was directed at its low difficulty and short length. Game journalists retrospectively consider it one of the best Game Gear and Master System games. The 8-bit Sonic has been re-released through Sonic game compilations and Nintendo's Virtual Console. It received several sequels, beginning with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in 1992. It was also Ancient's first game and the only Sonic game they developed. Gameplay. The 8-bit Sonic the Hedgehog is a side-scrolling platform game similar in gameplay and style to the original 16-bit Sega Genesis game of the same name, save for several new and altered game mechanics. As in the original, the anthropomorphic hedgehog Sonic ventures to rescue the animal population of South Island from the diabolical Dr. Robotnik, who plots to turn them into robots. The player jumps between platforms, avoids enemies and inanimate objects, and breaks televisions to collect shields, speed shoes, and invincibility, and mark checkpoints. Like the original, Sonic collects rings, which protect him from being hit by an enemy or an obstacle. The player starts the game with 3 lives, and will lose 1 if they are hit without carrying any rings, drown, fall into a bottomless pit, or reach the act's 10-minute time limit. The game ends prematurely when all lives are lost, although the player can return to the beginning of the current act if they have any continues. Gameplay is slightly slower and more focused on exploration than the original. Sonic travels through 6 levels called zones, each consisting of 2 main acts and a boss battle with Robotnik. The zones are based on various themes such as grassy plains, ancient ruins, and jungles. While some of the level themes, such as Green Hill Zone, are borrowed from the 16-bit version, others are original, and all the level designs are different and contain no vertical loops. Some of the game's levels require quick precision, and others require the player to go underwater. Certain acts have Chaos Emeralds hidden within them, and the player must collect all 6 to obtain the best possible ending. At the end of each main act, the player hits a signpost which will spin and land on an image. It can award bonuses depending on the image it settles on. If the player has over 50 rings, they can access a pinball-esque bonus stage where more rings and continues can be collected. Development. In 1990, Sega released the Game Gear, an 8-bit handheld game console designed to compete with Nintendo's Game Boy. Around the same time, Sonic Team worked on Sonic the Hedgehog for the 16-bit Genesis, and Sega wanted to increase consumer awareness of the Game Gear by producing a version of Sonic for the system. 22-year-old composer Yuzo Koshiro had recently started working with Sega, having been asked to compose the soundtrack for the 16-bit version of The Revenge of Shinobi from 1989. After he told a section chief he would develop the games itself, As a result, a general manager, whom Koshiro met with while working with on The Revenge of Shinobi, asked him to start developing a Game Gear version of Sonic. Koshiro found an Ancient to develop the game because Sega could not make contracts with individuals. His sister, Ayano Koshiro, served as director, and his mother, Tomo Koshiro, had a behind-the-scenes role, while the first programmer he hired was Shinobu Hayashi. The 8-bit Sonic was created specifically for the Game Gear, but Sega also had Ancient develop a version for the Master System, which was selling well and had similar hardware. Porting the original game to the 8-bit hardware was impossible, so Ancient built their Sonic from scratch. The team decided to make their version completely different from its 16-bit counterpart. According to Koshiro, the game had 3 phases of development. In the first phase, Ancient developed the game with the 16-bit version in mind. The second and third phases were largely Ancient's own ideas, with Sega supervising their work. Koshiro thought reinventing Sonic for an 8-bit hardware was challenging, as he did not work at Sega and had never developed a game before. However, Sega had faith in him because of his relationship to the company. Koshiro composed the soundtrack and sought to retain the feel of the 16-bit version. He converted Masato Nakamura's 16-bit Sonic score to the 8-bit programmable sound generator to start, but ended up using only 3 of those tracks. The remainder of the music is Koshiro's work. Release history. While the Game Gear version was developed first, Sega released the 8-bit Sonic for the Master System and Game Gear in Europe in November 1991, with North America getting both versions presumably around the same time, and in Japan only for the Game Gear on December 28, 1991. In Europe, the game was built into later versions of the Master System, while in North America it was the console's swan song. The Master System had failed to gain a foothold in North America, so its version of Sonic became a collector's item. The American Master System release is simply an import of the European version. Sega converted the European article number on the game packaging with a universal product code sticker. Nintendo World Report described the game as a weird release for the franchise because it did not focus on speed. Although it was profitable for Sega, the 8-bit Sonic sales were nowhere near as well as those for the 16-bit original. The game has been re-released in emulated form on several occasions. In 2003, Sega released Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, an enhanced version of the 1998 Sonic game Sonic Adventure for the GameCube and Windows. As the player progresses through the game, they unlock all 12 Sonic games released for the Game Gear, including the 8-bit Sonic. The Game Gear version is also available through Sega Sonic Mega Collection Plus from 2004, a compilation of Sonic games for Windows, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. Sega released the Master System version for the Wii's Virtual Console digital distribution service in Japan and North America in August 2008, and in Europe the following month. The Game Gear version was released for the Nintendo 3DS's Virtual Console in the West on June 13, 2013, and in Japan on December 4, 2013. Reception. Reviewers acclaimed the 8-bit Sonic. Most agreed it was a polished recreation of the 16-bit game, with Ace and Mean Machines writing those who owned the version could still enjoy it. The game's level variety and designs, the action-packed and addictive gameplay, and sound and visual quality, thought to be on par with the original versions, were commonly highlighted. Ace was impressed to see the Genesis version's main focus brought to the 8-bit systems intact. GamePro also considered its visuals top of the line for an 8-bit game. Reviewers criticized the relatively low difficulty and short length, although computer and video games wrote that those were also problems in the original, and Go considered the game more challenging than its Genesis predecessor. However, most found the problems did not detract from the experience. CVG wrote that the game still offered the player plenty, was just as good as the Genesis version. Retrospective reviews for the game's release on the Virtual Console were likewise positive. IGN wrote that although it was not as visually appealing, fast, or ambitious as its 16-bit predecessor, the 8-bit Sonic the Hedgehog was still a competent game in its own right, with unique level designs that managed to retain the feel of the original. Nintendo Life believed it was one of the first best platformers for the Master System and felt it was an interesting piece in the Sonic franchise's history, and found the Game Gear version easy to recommend to those who played the 16-bit version and were looking for a new experience and those who were just starting to play Sonic games. They said, quote, "It's short, but it's sweet," and that searching for Chaos Emeralds added replay value. GameSpy, reviewing Sonic Mega Collection Plus, felt the 8-bit Sonic and Sonic Chaos from 1993 were the series' only Game Gear installments worth playing. Legacy. Games Radar Plus named the 8-bit Sonic the 4th best Game Gear game, and they and Retro Gamer named it one of the best Master System games. The 8-bit Sonic was Ancient's first game, and the only Sonic game they developed. Beginning with its 1992 sequel, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, all subsequent 8-bit Sonic platforms were developed by Aspect Company. The Bridge Zone levels track became one of the most famous pieces of Sonic music and was used as a basis for Tails' theme in Sonic Adventure. Some fans have independently developed new ports of the game to run natively on other platforms. In 2019, a fan remake of the game was released for Microsoft Windows and Android, featuring widescreen gameplay and new playable characters, levels, and game mechanics. A fan-made Commodore 64 port was released in December 2021 with the original Z80 assembly code hands-translated to the 6510 CPU. All information here was provided by Wikipedia. Video game footage was provided by One Forsaken Gaming. Be sure to check out One Forsaken Gaming on Twitch and check out his YouTube page at 1FG Archives. And that'll wrap up episode 32 of the podcast, as well as season 2 of the Classic and Current Gaming podcast, where we looked at all the games being used in season 7 of the Retro Gaming League, as this is the last game being used this season. You can check out the podcast in different ways. You can watch the video presentation of it on YouTube, or you can listen to it on Spotify or your other favorite listening channels as well. We'll start up season 3 in the next week or so and start looking at some different games not associated with any competition necessarily, and have more great content for you coming throughout the year. It's been RxDude22 from the Classic and Concurrent Gaming podcast signing out. Keep on gaming. See you on the next stream. Be good to each other, and you'll hear me on the next podcast. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.